Look, no surprise to your listeners that war is extraordinarily expensive, and actually, often the weapons are not necessarily the most expensive thing. To run an army, you need huge amounts of particularly ammunition, which is very expensive.
Mm.
And as you know, Ukraine's starting to go on the offensive now. Those demands are going to increase. You need a lot more ammunition to have an offensive than to defend, for instance.
And is this more of the same or any kind of new equipment?
I think we probably do need to see some shifts. So, what we've seen over the last week was quite a rapid assault by Ukrainian forces. That's the kind of style of warfare that they're practicing against the Russians. What you need particularly for that are armored vehicles, or at least mechanized fast vehicles, and that's quite different to what the West has been predominantly supplying, which has been artillery and defensive weapons.
Mm.
So as Ukraine moves to liberate more areas, to push the Russians out of more occupied territory, they will need an increase in armored vehicles. And, as I said, lots and lots and lots of ammunition.
And where are those weapons coming from exactly?
So, initially in the war, a lot of Western countries used weapons straight out of their own stocks. So, just speaking for the British Army, for instance,
Mm.
when your listeners might recall, there was a big call for anti-aircraft weaponry, and a lot of that came straight out of the British Army stocks. And then what happens is the British military, then requests new ammunition and weaponry from industry, and there's a bit of a lag time with that, which is partly why we've seen. Over the pipeline of weapons to Ukraine, there's announcements, and then there's a bit of a lag, and then it turns up. And what that is that chain from the military to industry, and it takes a couple of months to get that going and to get those weapons forward.
Mm. Um, what do you expect? I mean, I know you're speaking from a kind of military point of view, but
Mm.
but how easy is it to sustain that kind of level of not so much money, but of weaponry, and the kind of the providence of it as well over perhaps a couple of years?
That's quite easy. I mean, as long as the money is going into the manufacturers that are producing it, we don't particularly have a problem with getting raw supplies forwards. I mean, it's going to be expensive.
Mm.
We've obviously, in an era of huge inflation and commodity inflation, it's going to be expensive. But as long as the money goes in, and now that industry has been switched on, obviously during peacetime, only a low level of arms are produced for the West in terms of training and so on and so forth. But once that has been switched on, which happened in February, that can continue indefinitely.
Okay, Dr. Mike Martin, thank you. We speak to him often on this programme, former British Army officer and a visiting research fellow at King's College Department of War Studies.
Let's bring in Dr. Karen von Hippel, Director General of the Royal United Services Institute. Good morning, Karen.
Good morning.
I guess one question that Truss is announcing another 2.3 billion. There'll be other commitments from other Western allies. There have been points in the conflict where these type of commitments will have gone through by everyone on the nod. People have said it's exactly right that we should be supporting Ukraine. Are we near at all a point where people will start to question the outlay of money and support that is going to Ukraine because they're concerned that we're supporting a war that's going to go on and ultimately we're paying the economic price for it at the same time? Do you sense any fatigue in this area?
Interesting question, and good morning, everyone. I think not yet is the answer. I think maybe when when we're in the thick of winter and oil prices are quite high, gas prices are quite high, there's more likely to be pushback because of concerns about the price of energy. But don't forget, the Ukrainians just had success on the battlefield, and there's nothing like success that emboldens the countries that are providing that aid. Russia is on the back foot right now. It's very hard to predict where this will go, which is, of course, the challenge going forward. But I do think the opportunity this coming week, all the world leaders being in New York City for the UN General Assembly for UNGA, is an opportunity for quiet diplomacy and public diplomacy to push very hard on Russia to withdraw.
But we can't expect the UN itself to do anything, can we? Because the Security Council has China and Russia on it. They'd veto anything. So we can't expect anything formal out of the UN, merely to regard it as a forum in which some world leaders can come to an agreement outside of the main structure.
Correct. I mean, UNGA is known as being a talking shop. It's sort of a gab fest, as people call it. But I do think it's an interesting opportunity this week. Don't forget, last week, what may have gone under the radar is both China and India, when they were in Uzbekistan for the Shanghai Organization Conference, they both pushed back on Putin for the first time that we've seen anyway publicly. And Putin admitted that China and India want an end to the war. Remember, Modi said now is not the time for war. China obviously voiced similar concerns. So I think Putin is in a bit more of a corner than he was before. At the UN General Assembly resolution last March after the war started, 35 countries abstained, and many of those are also allies of Russia and India. I'm sorry, of China and India. And so I think it's an opportunity to start trying to peel back some of those countries. And some of the best people to do that kind of lobbying are those countries from the former Soviet bloc, the Baltics, the East Europeans, and others who really have experienced firsthand, what Russian Empire is, and try to correct some of the myths that have been going around in many of the countries that abstained, whether it was Latin America, Africa, or even East Asia.
Because it'd be very hard for the West to, because from what you're saying, actually, that China and India are wobbling a bit. It'd be good to make them withdraw support completely or more fully from Russia. The relationship between the West and China is awful, though, isn't it? That Liz Truss has just been elected on saying China's public enemy number one. Same is true, presumably, of Biden. So does India become more critical? Because that seems like a country that lots of different countries around the world can talk to.
I don't think either India or China are going to fully withdraw support for Russia, but I think countries could put pressure on them quietly to really put pressure on Putin to change his approach. I think the one person who has the most influence is actually Xi from China, far more than Modi. I mean, Indians are very reliant on Russia for arms sales, and they're buying now. They're getting their fossil fuels from Russia at a discount. So I don't think it's going to be 180 or 360 change in policy, but I do think they have influence. And I think the African countries, the Latin American countries, and those other countries also have influence. It's not to say let's all give weapons to Ukraine. It's actually to push very hard on Russia to change its approach and to withdraw from Ukraine. And he'll make up something if he has to do something. If he has to withdraw, he'll make up some excuse so that it sounds like he won.